At 2:30 in the morning on Valentine's Day 2000, a 9-year-old girl walked out of her bedroom, past her sleeping parents, and into a freezing rainstorm, and then vanished, leaving behind only a few witnesses who saw her walking alone on a dark highway and questions that have haunted investigators for 25 years. Before we dive in, leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? And don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow, we've got another mind-blowing story for you. Asha Degree was born on August 5, 1990, in Shelby, North Carolina, a small city of about 20,000 people in Cleveland County, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, about 50 miles west of Charlotte. She was the second child of Harold and Aquila Degree, joining her older brother O'Brien, who was just 10 months her senior. The Degree family was close-knit, church-going, and deeply involved in their community. Harold worked for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, a stable government job that provided for the family. Aquila worked at Putnam Precision, a manufacturing company in Shelby. Both parents were described by everyone who knew them as devoted, protective, and loving. The kind of parents who knew where their children were at all times and who maintained strict but caring household rules. Asha and O'Brien attended Falston Elementary School, a small school in the rural area just outside Shelby, where the family lived on Oak Crest Drive. The house was modest, a single-story home in a quiet neighborhood where families knew each other and children played outside under the watchful eyes of multiple parents. It was the kind of community where people left doors unlocked, where kids rode bikes to friends' houses, where the notion of something terrible happening felt impossibly remote. By all accounts, Asha was a bright, happy child. She was shy around strangers, the type of girl who would hide behind her mother's legs when meeting new people. But she was warm and animated with family and close friends. She had a beautiful smile that lit up her whole face and a gentle, kind nature that made adults describe her as sweet and well-mannered. Teachers at Falston Elementary knew Asha as a good student, one who completed her assignments on time, who raised her hand to answer questions even though speaking up made her nervous, who tried hard to please her teachers and make her parents proud. Asha loved reading more than almost anything else. She would spend hours curled up with books, losing herself in stories. Her favorites were fairy tales and adventure books, stories about brave girls going on journeys, stories where good triumphed over evil, stories with happy endings. Her parents encouraged this love of reading, taking her to the library regularly, buying books as special treats, reading with her at bedtime, even as she got older and could read independently. Asha also loved sports, particularly basketball. She was small for her age, standing just 4 feet 6 inches tall and weighing about 60 pounds. But she had determination and hustle that made up for her size. She played on a local youth basketball team, practicing regularly, attending games with enthusiasm, even when her team lost. She wore number 23, the same number as her hero Michael Jordan, and she took her role as a team member seriously. Beyond basketball, Asha was a member of her school's safety patrol, a responsibility that gave her a sense of importance and duty. Safety patrol members helped younger students cross streets, held doors, and generally assisted with maintaining order and safety around the school. Asha wore her safety patrol badge with pride, following the rules carefully, taking her responsibility to help keep other children safe very seriously. The Degree family attended Bethel Baptist Church regularly, every Sunday morning and often Wednesday evenings for Bible study. Church was central to their lives, providing community, spiritual guidance, and a network of families who shared their values. Asha sang in the children's choir, her voice soft but earnest. She attended Sunday school, learning Bible stories and lessons about kindness, honesty, and faith. The family was known at church as one of the good families, the Degrees, who showed up consistently, who volunteered for church activities, whose children were polite and well-behaved. Harold and Aquia raised their children with clear rules and expectations. There were bedtimes that were enforced, chores that had to be completed, homework that had to be done before playing. The children were expected to be respectful to adults, to help around the house, to do their best in school. But the rules came with warmth and affection. Harold and Aquia were not harsh disciplinarians, but loving parents who wanted their children to grow up with structure and values. They ate dinner together as a family most nights. They went on outings together, to parks and playgrounds, to church picnics and community events. They celebrated birthdays and holidays with extended family, gathering at grandparents' houses for Sunday dinners, maintaining the strong family bonds that characterized Southern family culture. By February 2000, Asha was 9 years old, in 4th grade at Falston Elementary, and by all outward appearances, thriving. Her report card showed good grades, nothing spectacular, but solid performance from a student who worked hard. Her teachers had no concerns about her academic progress or her behavior. She got along well with classmates, had a small circle of close friends, and participated in school activities without problems. At home, Asha was helpful and obedient. She did her chores without excessive complaining, helped her mother with household tasks, played with O'Brien without the constant sibling warfare that characterized some families with children so close in age. Harold and Aquila would later tell investigators and anyone who would listen that Asha was a happy child. Not perfect, because no child is perfect, but happy. There were no warning signs, no indications that anything was wrong, no reasons to believe that their daughter was troubled or unhappy, or planning to do something completely out of character. This is crucial to understanding what makes Asha's disappearance so baffling. This wasn't a troubled teenager with a history of running away, with problems at school, with rebellion against parents. This was a 9-year-old girl from a loving, stable family, a girl who had never run away before, a girl who had no apparent reason to leave home. Yet on February 14th, 2000, that's exactly what she did. Sunday, February 13th, 2000 began like most Sundays for the Degree family. They attended morning services at Bethel Baptist Church, sitting together in their usual pew, Harold and Aquia flanking the 2 children, all of them dressed in their Sunday best. The service was typical. Hymns sung from worn hymnals, scripture readings, a sermon about love and forgiveness and walking in faith. Asha sat quietly through the service, as she always did, sometimes coloring in a children's activity book the church provided for younger members, sometimes just listening or letting her mind wander. After church, the family drove home to Oak Crest Drive, arriving around noon. Aquia prepared Sunday dinner, a tradition in their household and in many Southern families. The meal was substantial, likely including fried chicken or pot roast, vegetables, cornbread or biscuits, sweet tea to drink. The family ate together at the kitchen table, discussing the sermon, talking about the coming week, planning the logistics of school and work and basketball practice. That afternoon, Asha had a basketball game scheduled. It was part of the regular season for her youth league team, played at a local gymnasium. Harold drove Asha to the game, as he typically did for her sports activities. Aquila and O'Brien came along to watch and cheer. The game did not go well. Asha's team lost, but more significantly, for Asha personally, she made mistakes during the game that she felt responsible for. She missed shots she felt she should have made, lost the ball during a play, made an error in positioning that her coach corrected. For most children, these would be minor disappointments, part of learning and growing as an athlete. But Asha was a perfectionist, a child who internalized her mistakes and felt them deeply. After the game, she was quiet, disappointed in herself. Harold tried to encourage her during the drive home, telling her that everyone makes mistakes, that even professional basketball players miss shots, that what matters is trying your best and learning from errors. Michael Jordan himself missed thousands of shots during his career, Harold reminded her, but he kept playing and became the greatest. Asha listened to her father's words, but remained quiet, still processing her disappointment. That evening, the family settled into their Sunday night routine. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant school for the children and work for the parents. Asha needed to prepare. She took a bath, washed her hair, and got clean for the school week ahead. She laid out her school clothes for Monday morning, selecting an outfit and placing it carefully on a chair in her bedroom, a habit her mother had taught her to make mornings easier. She organized her school supplies, making sure her homework was completed, and in her backpack, that her pencils were sharpened, and that everything was ready. Around 8:00 p.m., Harold told the children it was time for bed. Both Asha and O'Brien brushed their teeth, changed into pajamas, and went to their shared bedroom. The room was small but comfortable, with twin beds positioned on opposite sides of the room, posters on the walls, toys and books organized on shelves, the intimate space of siblings who'd shared a room their entire lives. Harold and Aquila's bedroom was directly adjacent to the children's room, separated only by a wall and a doorway. In a house as small as the Degrees, sound traveled easily. Parents could hear if children were talking after lights out, if someone got up to use the bathroom, if anyone was awake when they shouldn't be. This proximity is significant because it means Asha left her room and the house without making noise that woke her parents or brother. Sometime that Sunday evening, probably after the children were in bed, a storm moved into the Cleveland County area. Rain began falling, steady and cold. The temperature dropped toward the mid-30s, unusual weather for mid-February, even in North Carolina. The combination of rain and cold created miserable conditions, the kind of night when anyone with sense stayed inside under blankets, grateful for shelter and warmth. At some point during the night, the power went out briefly. This was not uncommon during storms in rural areas, where power lines ran above ground and were vulnerable to wind and falling branches. The outage reset digital clocks throughout the house, including the alarm clocks in the children's bedroom. When power was restored, the clocks blinked 12 losing the correct time. This detail would become significant because it meant Harold and Aquila had to manually reset clocks and couldn't rely on them to know exactly what time various events occurred during the night. Around 2:30 a.m., According to Harold's later statements to investigators, he woke up. The exact reason he woke up isn't clear. Perhaps just natural stirring during the night. Perhaps a sound from the storm outside. Perhaps parental instinct, checking on sleeping children during bad weather. Harold got up from bed and went to check on Asha and O'Brien. He looked into their room and saw both children in their beds, apparently asleep, covered with blankets. Everything seemed normal. Harold returned to his own bed and went back to sleep. This 2:30 a.m. check would become one of the most analyzed moments in the entire case, because it established that Asha was still in her bed at that time. Whatever happened, whatever caused Asha to leave, occurred sometime after 2:30 a.m. The next time Harold and Aquila woke was at 5:45 a.m. on Monday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Harold's alarm went off, as it did every weekday morning. It was time to begin the Monday routine, to wake the children and get everyone ready for school and work. Harold got out of bed and walked to the children's room to wake them. O'Brien was in his bed, still sleeping. But Asha's bed was empty. The covers were thrown back, as if she'd gotten up during the night. But Asha was nowhere in the room. Harold's first thought was that Asha had gotten up early, perhaps gone to the bathroom or into another room. He called out for her. "Asha? Honey, where are you?" No response. Harold checked the bathroom. Empty. He walked through the small house, checking the living room, the kitchen, looking for his daughter. Aquila, hearing Harold moving through the house and calling for Asha, got up to help look. Together they searched more thoroughly, checking every room, looking in closets, under beds, in any space where a 9-year-old might be. They looked outside through windows, thinking perhaps Asha had gone into the yard for some reason, though that would have been highly unusual. Asha was not in the house. She was not in the yard. She was simply gone. As Harold and Aquila searched, they noticed something that made their concern escalate into alarm. The front door of the house was unlocked. They typically kept doors locked at night, a basic safety precaution, even in their safe neighborhood. But this morning, the door was unlocked. Had someone unlocked it from outside and come in? Had Asha unlocked it from inside and gone out? When they checked Asha's room more carefully, looking for clues about where she might have gone, they discovered that Asha's backpack was missing. Her school backpack, which should have been in her room, ready for the school day, was gone. Also missing were Asha's house keys, which she kept on a small keychain. Some of her personal items appeared to be missing as well, though in the panic of the moment it was hard to determine exactly what. The fact that Asha had apparently taken her backpack was significant. It suggested this wasn't a case of a child sleepwalking or wandering out confused. Taking a backpack indicated some level of intention, of planning, of purpose. But why would a 9-year-old girl pack a bag and leave her home in the middle of the night during a storm? By 6 a.m., Harold and Aquila had moved from concern to full panic. This wasn't like Asha. She was an obedient child who followed rules, who had never run away before, who had no history of impulsive behavior. She wouldn't leave the house without permission, especially not at night, especially not in bad weather. Harold picked up the phone and called 911. The call came in to the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office at approximately 6:40 a.m. Harold, his voice strained with worry and fear, reported that his 9-year-old daughter Asha was missing. She had been in her bed during the night, but was gone when he went to wake her for school. The house doors had been unlocked. Her backpack was missing. She had disappeared sometime between 2:30 a.m., when he'd last seen her sleeping, and 5:45 a.m., when he'd found her bed empty. The 911 dispatcher immediately began gathering information. What was Asha wearing when last seen? Pajamas, probably. What did she look like? African-American girl, 9 years old, about 4.5 feet tall, 60 pounds, with shoulder-length black hair, often worn in braids or pulled back. What would she wear if she dressed to leave? They didn't know. Her school clothes were still laid out. They didn't know what she might have changed into. Deputies were dispatched immediately to the Degree home on Oak Crest Drive. This was the kind of call that made law enforcement move fast. A missing 9-year-old in winter weather with hours already elapsed since she was last seen. Every minute mattered. Officers arrived at the scene within minutes, pulling up to the modest house with lights but no sirens, not wanting to cause neighborhood alarm, but responding with appropriate urgency. The initial investigation began immediately. Deputies took detailed statements from Harold and Equilia, asking questions about Asha's state of mind, about family dynamics, about whether she'd ever run away before, about whether there had been any recent changes or stresses in her life. They searched the house with the parents' permission, looking for any signs of what might have happened. They examined Asha's room carefully, looking for a note or anything she might have written that would explain why she left. They looked for evidence of forced entry, checking windows and doors for signs that someone had broken in during the night. The house showed no signs of intrusion. The unlocked front door appeared to have been opened from inside, not forced from outside. There were no broken windows, no damaged locks, no indication that anyone had entered the home without permission. This was significant because it suggested that Asha had left on her own, rather than being abducted from her bedroom. O'Brien, Asha's 10-year-old brother, was interviewed carefully by deputies. He had been sleeping in the same room as Asha. Had he seen or heard anything during the night? O'Brien said he had been asleep. He didn't remember hearing Asha get up or leave the room. He didn't know when she had gone or why. The last time he remembered seeing Asha was when they both went to bed around 8 p.m. the previous evening. O'Brien was clearly shaken, confused about why his sister would leave, worried about where she was. As morning progressed and word spread through the neighborhood that Asha Degree was missing, the community response was immediate. Shelby was a small city, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where news traveled fast through church networks and school connections, where a missing child was everyone's crisis. Neighbors began gathering at the Degree home, offering help, asking what they could do. Church members from Bethel Baptist arrived, bringing food and prayers and support. Local volunteers started organizing, preparing to conduct searches if needed. By mid-morning, multiple law enforcement agencies were involved. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office was the primary investigative agency, since the Degree home fell within their jurisdiction. The Shelby Police Department provided support and resources. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation was contacted and agreed to assist given the serious nature of a missing child case. The FBI was notified because of the possibility that Asha had been abducted, which could involve crossing state lines and thus federal jurisdiction. A command center was established to coordinate search efforts and investigate leads. Search teams were organized to cover the area around Oak Crest Drive and the surrounding neighborhoods. Volunteers walked through yards and wooded areas, checked abandoned buildings and sheds, knocked on doors, asking residents if they had seen Asha or noticed anything unusual during the night. Canine tracking units were brought in to try to follow Asha's scent trail from her home. The dogs were given items from Asha's room to establish her scent, then began tracking from the front door. The dogs picked up a trail leading away from the house, which confirmed that Asha had indeed left on foot. But the rain that had fallen throughout the night complicated the tracking. Water washes away scent molecules, making it harder for dogs to follow trails. The dogs indicated a general direction of travel, but couldn't establish a strong, continuous trail. The handlers reported that Asha's scent seemed to lead toward Highway 18, the main road that ran north-south through the area about a mile from Oak Crest Drive. This was significant information, but without a clear trail, investigators couldn't determine exactly what route Asha had taken or where she had gone. As the search efforts continued through Monday morning and into the afternoon, investigators received information that would dramatically change the direction of the case and introduce one of the most baffling elements of Asha's disappearance. Multiple witnesses came forward reporting that they had seen a young girl walking along Highway 18 in the early morning hours of February 14th. These witnesses were drivers who had been traveling on Highway 18 between approximately 3:45 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. Highway 18 is a two-lane rural highway that runs north-south through Cleveland County, connecting small towns and communities. The highway is bordered by fields, woods, and scattered residences. At 4 o'clock in the morning, it would have been completely dark except for vehicle headlights, cold with temperatures in the mid-30s, and raining steadily. The idea of anyone walking along that highway at that hour was unusual. The idea of a young child walking alone on that highway in those conditions was shocking. The first witness to come forward was a truck driver who called the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office after hearing news reports about Asha being missing. He told deputies that around 4 a.m. on Monday, February 14th, he had been driving south on Highway 18 when his headlights illuminated a small figure walking along the side of the road. It was a young black girl, appearing to be about 9 or 10 years old, wearing light-colored clothing. She had been walking south along the shoulder of the highway, walking with purpose, not stumbling or appearing distressed. The trucker said he had found it odd to see a child alone at that hour in the rain, but he was in a large vehicle moving at highway speed and didn't stop. He had assumed, he told investigators, that she must be with family nearby, perhaps walking a short distance from one house to another, though he acknowledged it had seemed strange, even at the time. When he heard about Asha Degree missing from her home, just a few miles from where he'd seen the girl, the trucker realized he needed to report what he'd seen. The location matched, the description matched, the timing matched. A second witness came forward with an even more detailed account. This witness was also driving on Highway 18 in the early morning hours, heading home from his shift at a nearby manufacturing facility. Around 4 a.m., he was driving north on Highway 18 when he saw a young black girl walking south on the opposite shoulder of the highway. His headlights had illuminated her clearly for several seconds as he approached and passed her. He described her as wearing white or very light-colored pants and a white shirt. She was carrying what looked like a book bag or backpack. She appeared to be alone, walking deliberately along the highway. The witness had been concerned about why a child would be out alone at that hour. He had slowed down as he passed her, watching her in his rearview mirror to make sure she was okay. And then something strange happened. As the witness watched in his mirror, the girl suddenly turned and ran off the highway into the woods, as if she was trying to hide from him or flee from his vehicle. This detail was crucial and deeply troubling to investigators. It suggested that Asha wasn't just walking along the highway, lost or confused. She was actively trying to avoid contact with adults. The witness, disturbed by what he'd seen and worried about the child's safety, had turned his vehicle around and driven back to the spot where the girl had run into the woods. He pulled over to the side of the highway, got out of his vehicle, and called into the dark woods. He asked if the child was okay, if she needed help, tried to reassure her that he just wanted to make sure she was safe. There was no response. The woods were dense, dark, with thick undergrowth. The witness couldn't see the child and didn't feel comfortable entering the woods alone at that hour. After calling out several more times without response, he got back in his vehicle and continued home. When he arrived home around 4:30 a.m., he told his wife about the encounter. She urged him to call the police immediately, but he had hesitated, not wanting to make a report about what might have been a misunderstanding or a family matter. But when news began circulating later that morning about 9-year-old Asha Degree missing from her home in Shelby, the witness immediately recognized that the girl he'd seen matched Asha's description. He called the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and provided a detailed statement about what he'd witnessed. The location he described was on Highway 18 near the intersection with Hickory Grove Baptist Church Road, approximately 1.3 miles north of the Degree home on Oak Crest Drive. This placed Asha more than a mile from home, walking in conditions that were dangerous for anyone, let alone a 9-year-old child. These witness sightings fundamentally changed the investigation. They confirmed several crucial facts. First, Asha had left her home voluntarily and was traveling on foot. This wasn't an abduction from her bedroom by someone who carried her away. Asha had walked out of her house on her own. Second, she had traveled a significant distance from home, more than a mile, during the darkest hours of the night in cold rain. Third, and most perplexingly, she was trying to avoid contact with people who might help her. When the second witness had tried to check on her, she had run and hidden rather than seeking help. This behavior was completely inconsistent with a lost child who would normally approach adults for assistance. It suggested Asha was either running away from something or running toward something, and that she had been told or believed she should avoid other adults who might try to stop her. Investigators immediately shifted the focus of their search to Highway 18 and the area where Asha had last been seen. The spot was approximately 1.3 miles north of the Degree home, near the Turner Upholstery Building, a small business that sat along the highway. The woods where Asha had reportedly run were on the east side of the highway, thick with pine trees and underbrush, typical of the forested areas throughout Cleveland County. Search teams descended on the area Monday afternoon. Deputies, state investigators, volunteers, and K-9 units combed through the woods, calling Asha's name, looking for any sign of her. The woods were difficult terrain, with uneven ground, thick vegetation, and limited visibility even in daylight. If Asha had gone deep into those woods, she could easily have gotten lost, injured, or trapped by the weather. The search continued through Monday evening and into Tuesday, February 15th. More volunteers joined, expanding the search area in ever-widening circles from the last known location. Helicopters with thermal imaging equipment were brought in to scan from above, looking for heat signatures that might indicate a person. The thermal imaging was particularly useful because it could detect body heat even through tree canopy and underbrush. But the cold rain and the time elapsed since Asha had disappeared complicated the thermal imaging. A small body that had been exposed to cold and wet for many hours might not register a strong enough heat signature to be detected from a helicopter. Ground crews continued to search on foot, checking every possible location where a child might take shelter or where a body might be hidden. They searched abandoned buildings and outbuildings in the area. They checked culverts and drainage pipes. They examined the shores of ponds and creeks, though there was no specific reason to believe Asha had gone near water. Every structure, every potential hiding place, every dangerous spot where a child might have fallen or gotten stuck was systematically examined. The Turner Upholstery building itself received particular attention. The business was closed when Asha had been seen in the area around 4 a.m. The building had a small storage shed on the property that wasn't regularly locked. Search teams checked the shed multiple times during the initial searches, but the shed was small and appeared to contain only business supplies and equipment. Nothing suggested Asha had been there. As Tuesday became Wednesday, February 16th, the search for Asha entered its third day. The weather remained cold and wet, with temperatures barely reaching 40 degrees during the day and dropping back into the 30s at night. If Asha was outside, exposed to these conditions, she was in serious danger. A 9-year-old child could not survive long in such weather without proper shelter, food, and warmth. The search area continued to expand. Search teams covered hundreds of acres of woods and fields surrounding Highway 18. They knocked on doors of residences in the area, asking if anyone had seen Asha or noticed anything unusual. They checked vehicles and outbuildings on properties with owners' permission. The massive search effort involved hundreds of volunteers, dozens of law enforcement officers, multiple K-9 units, and helicopter support. It was one of the most extensive missing child searches in North Carolina history. But despite all the resources and all the effort, Asha Degree was not found. On Thursday, February 17th, 3 days after Asha disappeared, investigators received additional witness information that helped them map Asha's route more precisely. A resident who lived along Highway 18, south of where the truckers had seen Asha, came forward to report that they had seen a young girl walking past their property in the early morning hours of February 14th. This sighting was between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., before the trucker sightings. The witness hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was a neighbor's child, but after hearing about Asha missing and seeing her photo, they realized they needed to report it. This earlier sighting helped investigators establish Asha's path. She had walked from her home on Oak Crest Drive to Highway 18, then turned north and walked along the highway past multiple properties and businesses for well over a mile before reaching the area where she was last seen near Turner Upholstery. This was a significant distance for a 9-year-old to walk in darkness and rain. It suggested determination and purpose. It suggested Asha knew where she was going, or at least had a specific intention to keep moving in that direction. But where was she going? That question remained unanswered and would become central to understanding why Asha left home. On Friday, February 18th, 4 days after Asha vanished, the first physical evidence was discovered. A search team combing the area near where Asha had last been seen made a find in the storage shed at the Turner Upholstery Building. Despite the shed having been searched multiple times during the initial searches on Monday and Tuesday, investigators decided to conduct another thorough examination. This time, they found items that had apparently been missed during previous searches, or perhaps had been placed there between searches. The items found included a pencil and a hair bow. Both items were shown to Harold and Aquila, who identified them as belonging to Asha. The pencil had markings consistent with what Asha used at school. The hair bow matched hair accessories that Asha owned and wore. The discovery of these items in the shed confirmed that Asha had been in or near that location at some point after leaving her home. It suggested she may have taken shelter in the shed, perhaps trying to get out of the rain, perhaps resting during her walk. But the shed was small and open, easily visible to anyone who looked inside. How had these items been missed during the first searches? Or had they been placed there after the initial searches? If someone had taken Asha and then returned to plant evidence, that would suggest a level of planning and risk-taking that was extremely unusual in child abduction cases. The items were collected as evidence and sent to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab for forensic analysis. Investigators hoped that fingerprints, DNA, or other trace evidence on the items might provide leads about who had been with Asha or where she had gone. The forensic analysis would take time, but the discovery of physical evidence was significant progress in a case that had so far yielded frustratingly few clues. On Tuesday, February 22nd, 8 days after Asha disappeared, another significant evidence discovery was made. Search crews conducting another systematic sweep of the area near Highway 18 found additional items along the highway shoulder and in nearby brush. The items were found in a slightly different location, from the shed, scattered along about 100 yards of highway north of where Asha had last been seen by witnesses. Among the items discovered was a family photograph, a wallet-sized school photo of Asha that she had apparently been carrying with her. Also found was a candy wrapper specifically for a brand of candy that Harold and Aquila confirmed was Asha's favorite. Several hair beads and ribbons that appeared to match accessories Asha wore in her hair were also recovered. These items provided further confirmation that Asha had been in the area, but they also raised questions about how they came to be scattered along the highway. Had Asha dropped them as she walked, perhaps items falling from her backpack? Has someone else deliberately placed them there? Were they marking a trail, or were they simply evidence of Asha's passage? By this point, the investigation had expanded far beyond the immediate search for Asha. Detectives were conducting extensive interviews with everyone connected to Asha's life. Teachers and staff at Falston Elementary School were interviewed about Asha's behavior in the days before she disappeared, about her interactions with other students, about whether she had mentioned anything concerning or unusual. Asha's classmates were interviewed carefully with parents' permission, asking if Asha had said anything about running away or about plans to go anywhere. Asha's basketball coach and teammates were interviewed, particularly given that Asha had been disappointed after the game on Sunday. Had that disappointment been more significant than her parents realized? Had Asha mentioned anything to teammates about how she was feeling? Friends from church and the neighborhood were interviewed. Has Asha confided in anyone about problems or plans? The interviews revealed that Asha had been quieter than usual in the days immediately before she disappeared. Several classmates mentioned that she had seemed distracted or preoccupied in the week leading up to Valentine's Day. But nothing specific emerged that explained why she would leave home. One detail that did emerge from interviews with classmates became significant to investigators. Several of Asha's friends reported that in the days before she disappeared, Asha had mentioned a sleepover. She had told friends that she was going to have a sleepover, though the details were vague. Was she expecting to go to a friend's house? Was someone supposed to visit her house? The friends couldn't provide specifics. It was just something Asha had mentioned in passing. Investigators followed up on this sleepover carefully. They contacted all of Asha's close friends and their parents, asking if there had been any plans for Asha to stay overnight at anyone's house. There had been no such plans. Harold and Ikea confirmed they had not authorized any sleepover and had not been planning for Asha to stay anywhere overnight. So what had Asha been referring to? This question became important because it suggested Asha might have been expecting something, some event or plan that her parents knew nothing about. Has someone been communicating with Asha, making plans with her, without her parents' knowledge? In 2000, this kind of secret communication was more difficult than it would become in later years with cell phones and social media. Asha didn't have her own phone or email. She didn't have unsupervised internet access. So if someone had been communicating with her, it would have been through face-to-face contact, through notes, passed at school, or through some other method that left no obvious trail. Investigators compiled lists of every adult who had regular contact with Asha: teachers, coaches, church leaders, family friends, neighbors, extended family members. Each person was interviewed. Backgrounds were checked for criminal histories, particularly any history involving children. Alibis for the night of February 13th and early morning of February 14th were established and verified. This was methodical, time-consuming work, but it was necessary to identify anyone who might have had the opportunity and motive to groom Asha or convince her to leave home. Harold and Asha Degree themselves were subject to intense scrutiny, as is standard procedure in missing child cases. Statistics show that when children are harmed, family members are most often responsible. Investigators had to examine the possibility that something had happened at the Degree home, that Harold or Ikea, or both, had harmed Asha and staged the evidence to make it appear she had run away. Both parents were interviewed extensively, separately, and together, repeatedly, over the days following Asha's disappearance. They answered every question, provided detailed accounts of February 13th and 14th, submitted to polygraph examinations, and allowed complete searches of their home and vehicles. Harold's timeline was examined carefully. He had stated that he checked on the children around 2:30 a.m. and saw both of them sleeping. Investigators worked to verify this timing and to establish whether Harold's movements during the night were consistent with his statements. Could he have harmed Asha and disposed of her body between 2:30 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. while Iquilla slept? The investigation found this scenario extremely unlikely. The house was small. Iquilla would likely have heard any significant noise or disturbance. There was no evidence of violence in the home, no blood or signs of struggle. And critically, the witness sightings of Asha walking along Highway 18 around 4 a.m. independently confirmed that she had been alive and on foot at that time, which meant she wasn't harmed at home earlier in the night. Iquilla's account was also examined. She had been asleep during Harold's 2:30 a.m. check. She had woken at 5:45 a.m. when Harold's alarm went off. Could she have harmed Asha during the night without Harold knowing? Again, investigators found this implausible. The witness sightings confirmed Asha had been walking on Highway 18. If Iquilla had harmed Asha, she would have needed to dispose of a body, which would have required leaving the house and being absent for a period that Harold would have noticed. The polygraph examinations of both Harold and Iquilla showed no deception. While polygraphs are not definitive proof, they are useful investigative tools. The FBI polygraph examiners concluded that Harold and Iquilla were being truthful in their statements that they didn't know what happened to Asha or why she left. Investigators also examined the family's finances, looking for any indication of stress that might have contributed to family problems. They found nothing unusual. Harold and Iquilla lived modestly, but within their means. There were no hidden debts, no financial pressures that would create household tension. They examined the family's relationships with extended family, looking for any conflicts or concerns. They found a typical family structure with normal relationships. By the end of February 2000, investigators had thoroughly examined the Degree family and found no evidence that Harold or Iquilla had been involved in Asha's disappearance. The consensus among law enforcement was that the Degrees were loving, protective parents who were victims of an unthinkable tragedy. As the investigation continued into March 2000 with Asha still missing and no major breaks in the case, law enforcement turned increasing attention to the theory that someone had groomed Asha and convinced her to leave home. This theory fits the facts better than alternatives. It explained why Asha had packed a backpack and left voluntarily. It explained why she had walked with apparent purpose toward a specific location. It explained why she had avoided the truckers who tried to help her, if she had been told not to trust other adults who might try to interfere. But identifying who might have groomed Asha proved difficult. Investigators interviewed everyone who had regular access to Asha through legitimate channels. They examined her interactions at school, church, basketball, and neighborhood activities. They looked for any adult who had shown unusual interest in Asha, who had given her gifts, who had sought opportunities to be alone with her, who had tried to build a special relationship with her. Several individuals received closer scrutiny during this process, not because there was clear evidence of their involvement, but because their proximity to Asha, or their backgrounds, raised questions that needed to be answered. One individual who received significant investigative attention was a person connected to Asha through family relationships. This person, whose name has never been officially released by investigators, had some past criminal history that made them a person of interest in any case involving a missing child. The person was interviewed multiple times asked about their whereabouts during the relevant time period and had their property and vehicles searched. Investigators also looked at registered sex offenders living in Cleveland County and surrounding areas. North Carolina maintained a sex offender registry that law enforcement could access. Anyone with a history of crimes against children within a reasonable distance of Shelby was identified and investigated. Each person was interviewed, alibis were verified, and any potential connections to Asha were examined. No clear suspect emerged from this process, but several individuals remained on the list of persons of interest, people who couldn't be definitively ruled out even if there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge them. The FBI behavioral analysts who were consulting on the case developed a profile of Asha's likely abductor based on the evidence and circumstances. The profile suggested someone who lived in or was very familiar with the Shelby area, who would have had legitimate access to Asha through normal channels like school, church, or community activities, who had likely been building a relationship with Asha over a period of time rather than being a complete stranger, who was organized enough to plan having Asha leave at a specific time, and who had the psychological control to convince a 9-year-old to do something completely out of character. The profile also suggested that if Asha had been abducted, the person responsible might have kept some of her belongings as trophies, might have inserted themselves into the search efforts or investigation in some way, and might live alone or have privacy that would allow them to hide a child or dispose of a body without others knowing. Throughout the spring and summer of 2000, the investigation continued with decreasing public attention, but undiminished law enforcement commitment. Every tip that came in through the dedicated hotline was evaluated and investigated. Some tips were clearly not credible, people with mental health issues, or people seeking attention. But many tips came from concerned citizens who genuinely believed they had information that might help, even if most tips ultimately led nowhere. Harold and Asha Degree refused to let Asha's case fade from public consciousness. They appeared on national television programs, including Oprah Winfrey's show and America's Most Wanted, making emotional pleas for information and for Asha's safe return. The appearances on national television brought Asha's case to millions of viewers and generated thousands of new tips that had to be evaluated. In August 2000, on what would have been Asha's 10th birthday, the family held a vigil at Shelby City Park. Hundreds of community members attended, lighting candles, releasing balloons, and praying for Asha's safe return. The vigil became an annual tradition, held every year on Asha's birthday and on the anniversary of her disappearance, each February 14th. These events kept Asha's case in the local news and reminded the community that she was still missing, that her family was still searching, that any information might be crucial. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children became deeply involved in Asha's case, providing resources and expertise that supplemented local law enforcement efforts. Asha's photo and information were distributed nationally through the center's network, posted on their website, which was still relatively new in 2000, included in mailings to law enforcement agencies, and featured in public awareness campaigns. Age progression photos were created showing what Asha might look like as she grew older, if she was alive, somewhere being held by an abductor, or raised under a false identity. In August 2001, 18 months after Asha disappeared, the case took a dramatic turn, with a major evidence discovery that would provide the most significant break in the investigation, but would also raise as many questions as it answered. A construction crew working along Highway 18 in Burke County, North Carolina, approximately 26 miles north of Shelby, made a startling discovery. They were excavating along the highway shoulder, doing road-widening work, when their equipment struck something buried in the soil. When they investigated, they found a plastic garbage bag that had been wrapped and buried approximately 18 inches below the surface. The construction foreman, recognizing that a buried bag might contain something significant, stopped work and called the Burke County Sheriff's Office. Deputies responded and carefully excavated the bag. When they opened it, they found another plastic bag inside, a double wrapping that had been done to preserve the contents. Inside the inner bag were items that were immediately recognizable as belonging to a child: a purple and white backpack, children's clothing, family photographs, and other personal items. The items were examined, and investigators quickly realized they were looking at Asha Degree's missing backpack. The backpack was definitively identified through distinctive markings and contents. Inside were some of Asha's belongings, including family photos, some of her clothing, and personal items that Harold and Aquila confirmed belonged to their daughter. The clothing included a white shirt and dark pants, different from what Asha had been wearing when last seen by the truckers on Highway 18, suggesting she had changed clothes at some point or had packed additional clothing in her backpack when she left home. The discovery of Asha's backpack was monumental for the investigation. First, it confirmed that Asha had traveled significantly farther from Shelby than anyone had previously believed. 26 miles was well beyond where search efforts had been concentrated. It meant that Asha hadn't simply gotten lost in the woods near where she was last seen, but had traveled, almost certainly in a vehicle, a considerable distance up Highway 18. Second, the fact that the backpack had been carefully double wrapped in plastic and deliberately buried indicated that someone was trying to hide evidence. This wasn't Asha accidentally dropping her backpack. This was someone taking her belongings and concealing them in a way that suggested they knew the items would be incriminating. Third, the location in Burke County meant the investigation now needed to expand to cover multiple counties and brought Burke County Sheriff's Office and additional agencies into the investigation. The backpack and its contents were sent immediately to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab for forensic analysis. Investigators hoped that fingerprints, DNA, hair fibers, or other trace evidence might finally provide the break needed to identify who had taken Asha and where she had been. The forensic analysis was extensive and utilized the best technology available in 2001. The plastic bags were examined for fingerprints. The backpack and clothing were analyzed for DNA. Everything was photographed, cataloged, and tested. The results were frustratingly limited. The items had been buried for 18 months, exposed to moisture and soil despite the plastic wrapping. This degradation had compromised some potential evidence. No clear fingerprints were recovered that could be matched to anyone in law enforcement databases. DNA analysis revealed DNA that appeared to be Asha's on items like her clothing, which was expected but didn't reveal clear DNA from anyone else that could be used to identify a suspect. However, the forensic analysis did reveal some significant information. The double wrapping in plastic bags had been done carefully, with the bags sealed in ways that suggested whoever buried the backpack had taken time and care to preserve it. This indicated planning and caution, not panicked evidence disposal. The analysis also revealed some fibers and trace materials on the items that didn't match anything from Asha's home. These fibers would be preserved for comparison if a suspect was ever identified, potentially allowing investigators to connect a suspect to the buried evidence. The discovery of the backpack in Burke County raised crucial questions that investigators worked to answer. When had it been buried? Was it immediately after Asha disappeared in February 2000, suggesting the person who took her had driven directly to Burke County to dispose of evidence? Or had it been buried later, perhaps weeks or months after her disappearance? The construction crew couldn't provide a definitive timeline. The highway had undergone various maintenance over the 18 months, but the spot where the backpack was buried hadn't been disturbed during that time. The depth of burial and the soil compaction suggested the backpack had been there for a significant period, possibly since early 2000. But forensic analysis couldn't pinpoint an exact date. Why Burke County? This question became central to the investigation. Investigators began examining connections between Cleveland County, where Asha disappeared, and Burke County, where her backpack was found. They looked for people who lived in one county and worked in the other, who had family in both areas, who regularly traveled Highway 18 between the locations. They examined registered sex offenders in both counties. They looked at businesses and organizations that had connections, spanning both areas. The section of Highway 18 where the backpack was found was examined thoroughly. Were there residences nearby where Asha might have been taken? Were there businesses or properties that would have given someone reason to be in that area? The location was relatively remote, with woods and fields surrounding the highway. The nearest residence was about a quarter-mile away. The site seemed to have been chosen specifically because it was isolated, where someone could pull off the highway and bury something without being observed. For Harold and Asha Degree, the discovery of Asha's backpack brought a complex mixture of emotions. On one hand, it confirmed that Asha had been taken by someone, that the investigation's focus on abduction had been correct. On the other hand, the careful burial of the backpack suggested that whoever took Asha had been methodical about covering their tracks, which raised terrible questions about what might have happened to Asha herself. Had she been buried somewhere as well? Was her body hidden in another remote location that searchers hadn't found? Or did the careful preservation of the backpack mean something else? That whoever took Asha had kept her alive for some period, and the backpack had been a loose end that needed to be tied up later? These questions tormented the family. The investigation reinvigorated following the backpack discovery. Detectives re-examined everything they knew about the case with this new information. Every person of interest from the original investigation was re-interviewed, asked about their knowledge of Burke County, their whereabouts in the months after Asha disappeared, whether they had any connection to the area where the backpack was found. The FBI increased its involvement, providing additional behavioral analysis and investigative resources. The case was featured again on national television programs, with the backpack discovery presented as a major development that might lead to solving the case. Despite the renewed investigative push, no arrests were made in the months following the backpack discovery. The physical evidence, while significant, didn't point to a specific suspect. The lack of clear DNA or fingerprints meant investigators couldn't match the evidence to anyone in criminal databases. Without a suspect to focus on, the investigation continued to pursue all possible leads. But, without the breakthrough, everyone had hoped the backpack would provide. As 2001 became 2002, and then 2003 and 2004, Asha's case remained open but essentially cold. Investigators continued to work the case, but without new evidence or witnesses coming forward, progress stalled. The annual vigils continued, with the Degree family and faithful community members gathering each February 14th and each August 5th to remember Asha and to renew pleas for information. The vigils grew smaller each year as public attention inevitably waned and people moved on with their lives. But Harold and Niquila never wavered in their commitment to finding their daughter. In 2005, 5 years after Asha disappeared, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office organized a major re-examination of the case. Sheriff Dan Crawford assigned a detective to review every piece of evidence, every interview, every tip, looking for anything that might have been missed or not fully pursued. The review took months and involved re-interviewing key witnesses, tracking down people who had been persons of interest but had since moved away, and applying new forensic techniques to evidence that had been collected in 2000. The review confirmed that the original investigation had been thorough and professional. No major mistakes or oversights were identified. But the review also highlighted how difficult the case was. The lack of physical evidence connecting anyone to Asha's disappearance, the absence of any clear crime scene, and the mystery of why Asha left home in the first place all combined to make this an extraordinarily challenging case to solve. Throughout the 2000s, advances in forensic technology offered periodic hope that evidence from Asha's case might yield new information. DNA analysis technology improved significantly, with methods developed that could extract and analyze much smaller samples than had been possible in 2000. Items from Asha's case were periodically resubmitted to crime labs to see if new techniques could reveal DNA that previous analysis had missed. Some items did yield additional DNA information, but nothing that pointed to a specific suspect or that matched anyone in CODIS, the national DNA database. The FBI continued to maintain Asha's case as an active investigation, keeping her on the list of missing persons and providing resources to local law enforcement as needed. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children updated Asha's age progression photos every few years, creating images showing what she might look like at 12, 15, 18, and into young adulthood. These images were distributed widely, with the hope that if Asha was alive somewhere, someone might recognize her. In 2010, on the 10th anniversary of Asha's disappearance, the case received renewed media attention. National news programs produced segments about the girl who walked into the rain and vanished. True crime television shows featured Asha's case in episodes examining unsolved child disappearances. The media coverage generated hundreds of new tips, each of which was evaluated by investigators. Some tips were clearly not credible, but others warranted follow-up investigation. None led to major breaks in the case, but investigators emphasized that every tip was important because the one that solved the case might come from an unexpected source. In 2016, on the 16th anniversary of Asha's disappearance, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office announced that the case was being actively re-examined using the latest forensic technologies. Sheriff Alan Norman, who had been one of the original investigators when Asha disappeared, and was now sheriff, remained personally committed to solving the case. He organized a dedicated team to review every piece of evidence with fresh eyes and new technology. The re-examination included sending evidence items back to labs for testing with the most advanced DNA analysis methods available, reviewing thousands of pages of interview transcripts and investigative reports, re-interviewing witnesses who could be located, and examining the case with modern investigative techniques and behavioral analysis. In February 2018, on the 18th anniversary of Asha's disappearance, the FBI and Cleveland County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to announce new developments in the case. While they didn't announce an arrest or identification of a specific suspect, they did reveal information that had been held back from public knowledge for investigative reasons. Specifically, they released details about evidence items that had been found near where Asha was last seen on Highway 18. The FBI revealed that among the items recovered were a Dr. Seuss book, specifically McElligot's Pool, and a New Kids on the Block concert t-shirt. These items had been found during the searches in February 2000, but their details had never been made public. Investigators believed these items were significant because they did not belong to Asha and were not from her home or school. The book and t-shirt had potentially come from whoever was involved in Asha's disappearance. The FBI provided detailed descriptions and photographs of these items. The Dr. Seuss book was a hardcover copy of McElligot's Pool, a children's book first published in 1947. The specific edition found could potentially be traced through library systems, school book collections, or personal ownership records if anyone recognized it. The New Kids on the Block t-shirt was described as a white tank top style shirt, featuring the boy band that had been popular in the late 1980s and early 1990s. By 2000, the band was no longer at peak popularity, which made the shirt notable. It suggested the shirt was older, possibly from someone who had owned it during the band's heyday. The FBI's decision to release this information 18 years after the fact was strategic. They believed that someone in the public might recognize these specific items, might remember who owned that particular book or shirt, and that this recognition might provide the lead needed to identify who had been involved in Asha's disappearance. The announcement generated enormous public response. The FBI received thousands of tips in the days and weeks following the press conference. People called in reporting that they owned similar books or shirts, that they remembered seeing such items at yard sales or thrift stores, that they recalled someone they knew having these items years ago. Each tip was cataloged and investigated. Most led nowhere, but investigators remained hopeful that somewhere in the flood of tips was the crucial information they needed. In 2020, 20 years after Asha disappeared, her case remained one of the most baffling missing child cases in American history. 2 decades of investigation, thousands of tips, extensive forensic analysis, multiple re-examinations of evidence, and unwavering family advocacy had not produced an arrest or definitive answers about what happened to Asha. Sheriff Alan Norman, now retired, passed the case to his successor, but remained involved as a consultant, unable to let go of the case that had haunted him for 2 decades. In 2021, the FBI and Cleveland County Sheriff's Office announced a significant development. They stated publicly that they had identified a person of interest in Asha's case. They did not name this individual or provide specific details about why the person had been identified, citing the ongoing investigation. The announcement indicated that advances in forensic analysis of evidence, combined with new witness information, had led investigators to focus on a specific individual. Sheriff Chris Wilkerson, who had taken over from Norman, emphasized that the investigation had never closed and that solving Asha's case remained a top priority for his office. The announcement that a person of interest had been identified generated intense speculation in true crime communities and local media. Who was this person? What evidence had led investigators to them? Were charges imminent? Sheriff Wilkerson declined to provide details, stating only that the investigation was active and that he believed there were people in the community who had information about Asha's disappearance but had not come forward. He made a direct appeal to anyone with knowledge, emphasizing that even small details that might seem insignificant could be the pieces investigators needed to build a case. As of 2024, 24 years after Asha Degree walked out of her home into a freezing rainstorm, the case remains open, and the person of interest identified in 2021 has not been publicly named or charged. Asha, if she's alive, would be 33 years old. The statistical likelihood of her being alive after 24 years is vanishingly small, but without a body or definitive evidence of her death, absolute certainty remains elusive, and Harold and Aquila maintain hope that she might someday be found. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office continues to work the case actively. A dedicated detective remains assigned to follow up on tips that come in through the hotline, to pursue leads generated by the 2021 identification of a person of interest, and to re-examine evidence as forensic technologies continue to advance. The FBI maintains Asha's case on its list of missing persons and continues to provide resources and support to local law enforcement. Harold and Aquila Degree still live in Shelby, North Carolina, in the same community where they raised Asha and O'Brien. They've never moved away, maintaining their connection to the place where Asha disappeared, holding on to hope that if she ever returns, she'll know where to find them. They've kept Asha's bedroom, largely as it was, a shrine to their missing daughter. The room contains her belongings, her books, her basketball trophies, her safety patrol badge, frozen in time from February 13th, 2000. The vigils continue, though attendance has dwindled over 24 years. Each February 14th and each August 5th, Harold and Aquila gather with faithful supporters to remember Asha, to renew pleas for information, and to refuse to let their daughter be forgotten. The vigils are smaller now, attended mostly by family, and a core group of community members who've remained committed over more than 2 decades. But they continue as testament to a family's unending love and determination. The question that has haunted everyone connected to this case for 24 years remains: why did Asha leave her home that night? Nothing about her background, her family life, her personality, or her circumstances suggested she would run away. She wasn't troubled, wasn't being abused, and wasn't in danger at home. She was a happy, well-adjusted 9-year-old from a loving, protective family. Yet she packed her backpack, unlocked the doors, and walked out into a storm in the middle of the night, walking more than a mile in darkness and cold rain, avoiding adults who tried to help her. The theories about what motivated Asha to leave fall into several categories, each with supporting evidence, but none definitively proven. The most widely accepted theory among investigators is that Asha was groomed by someone she trusted, an adult who built a relationship with her over time and convinced her to leave home to meet them. This theory is supported by the mention of a sleepover that Asha made to classmates, by the fact that she packed her backpack with specific items suggesting planning, by witness reports that she seemed to be walking with purpose toward a destination, and by her behavior of hiding from the truckers, which would be consistent with being told to avoid other adults who might interfere. If this theory is correct, the groomer would have been someone with legitimate access to Asha through school, church, sports, or family connections, someone she trusted enough to obey, even when instructions conflicted with everything her parents had taught her about safety. The groomer would have told her when and where to go, possibly promised her something exciting, and warned her not to trust other adults who might try to stop her. A second theory is that Asha left because of something specific that happened on February 13th, or in the days immediately before, something that upset her enough to make running away seem like a solution, even though she had nowhere to go. This theory focuses on the basketball game on Sunday afternoon, where Asha made mistakes and was disappointed in her performance. Some have speculated that she might have been punished or scolded more harshly than her parents remembered, creating a temporary emotional state where leaving seemed preferable to facing consequences. But this theory has significant weaknesses. Harold and Iquia have consistently stated that while Asha was disappointed after the game, she wasn't punished and was given encouragement rather than criticism. Teachers and friends saw no indication Asha was unusually upset on Friday at school. And critically, this theory doesn't explain the purposeful nature of Asha's walk or why she would avoid people trying to help her. A third theory, less popular among investigators but discussed in some true crime analyses, is that Asha was actually trying to go somewhere specific, perhaps to visit a friend, or to find a location she'd heard about, and that her plan simply went tragically wrong when she got lost or was intercepted by an opportunistic predator. This theory would require identifying a destination that makes sense for a 9-year-old to target, and no such destination has ever been identified. Highway 18 north of Shelby doesn't lead to any friend's house or any location Asha would have reason to seek. The theory also struggles to explain why Asha would attempt such a journey at 3 a.m. in a storm without telling anyone. A fourth theory, darker and more speculative, suggests that Asha never actually left home voluntarily, that something happened to her at home, and the witness sightings were either mistaken identity or that someone staged evidence to make it appear Asha had run away. This theory has been investigated exhaustively by law enforcement and found to have no supporting evidence. The witnesses who saw a girl on Highway 18 were credible, interviewed separately, and provided consistent descriptions. The girl matched Asha's appearance and was wearing clothing consistent with what Asha would have had. Harold and Iquia have been thoroughly investigated, polygraphed, and cleared by multiple agencies. The overwhelming consensus among law enforcement is that the parents are innocent victims of tragedy. The most likely scenario, based on available evidence and investigator assessments, remains that Asha was groomed by someone who convinced her to sneak out and meet them, that she walked from her home toward a meeting point somewhere along Highway 18, that the person picked her up after she'd been walking for some time, possibly after she'd run into the woods to hide from the truckers, and that this person then took Asha somewhere, harmed her, and disposed of her body in a location that has never been found, despite extensive searches. The careful burial of her backpack 26 miles away demonstrates planning and criminal sophistication. It suggests someone who understood the importance of disposing of evidence and who had the means to travel to a remote location to hide it. Where is Asha Degree? This question is at the heart of the family's ongoing agony and the investigation's continuing efforts. The area around Shelby and extending up Highway 18 through Burke County has been searched repeatedly over 24 years. Ground searches, aerial searches, searches of bodies of water, examination of abandoned properties, all have failed to locate remains. Several possibilities exist about where Asha's body might be. She could be buried on private property, somewhere searchers had no access or reason to look without specific cause. She could be in the vast forested areas of Cleveland or Burke County, in terrain so difficult and extensive that despite good faith search efforts, her remains simply haven't been found. She could have been disposed of in water, in a lake or river, where remains might never be recovered. She could have been moved to another state entirely, taken far from North Carolina, by someone who wanted to ensure she was never found. Until remains are found, or someone with knowledge comes forward, the question of Asha's location will remain tragically unanswered. The person of interest identified in 2021 represents the best hope in years for finally solving this case. While investigators haven't revealed details, the fact that they identified a specific individual suggests they have evidence that wasn't previously available, or that they've connected information in new ways. Whether this leads to charges and prosecution depends on whether prosecutors believe they have sufficient evidence to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt, a high standard that requires more than suspicion or circumstantial connections. This is the story of Asha Degree, a 9-year-old girl who walked out of her home into a freezing rainstorm on Valentine's Day, 2000, and vanished, leaving behind a family destroyed by grief and not knowing. Investigators frustrated by a case that defies easy solution despite extraordinary effort and resources, and a community that has never forgotten the bright, shy child who loved books and basketball and whose smile has been frozen in time at age 9 for 24 years. It's a story about the vulnerability of children, even in loving, protective families, about the evil that exists in the world, despite our efforts to shield the innocent, about the limits of investigation and forensic science, when predators are careful and evidence is scarce. It's a story about a family's unending love and determination, about parents who've spent more than 2 decades searching for answers, refusing to give up hope, keeping their daughter's memory alive through vigils and advocacy and faith. It's a story about a community that came together in the face of tragedy, that searched tirelessly in the days after Asha disappeared, that has supported the Degree family through decades of waiting, that wants justice for a child who deserved to grow up. 24 years after Asha Degree disappeared, the investigation continues. The person of interest identified in 2021 remains under investigation. Forensic analysis of evidence continues as technologies improve. Tips still come in through the dedicated hotline, each one evaluated for potential relevance. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children remain committed to solving this case. Somewhere, Someone knows what happened to Asha Degree. Someone knows why she left home that night. Someone knows who took her. Someone knows where she is. Until that person comes forward, until evidence emerges that breaks the case open, Asha's disappearance will remain one of the most baffling and heartbreaking missing child cases in American history. If you found this investigation useful, please like the video, subscribe, and share it to keep Asha's story alive. Comment your thoughts on what you think happened. Thank you for supporting thorough